But the key here is how a bill becomes a law. And we'll send these slides out so people can peruse it. But the first way it becomes a law is you ask somebody to sponsor it. So you find a legislature who cares about your issue. Usually it's a local legislator or somebody who cares about it because it pertains to you riding locally. Bills need to be in the first year of a session. A session is 2 years. But the bold down here is actually what I really want us to focus on right now, where after bills go to committee, and actually after they have had hearings and we've been able to testify, all bills need to be reported out favorably on the first Wednesday of the second annual session of the general court on all matters before them, before the first day of the second annual session. That's a long-winded way of saying we have until February 2nd to get our bills moving. Now, if the bills don't move, they're not dead, but this is the next goalpost, the next deadline for us to get the bills that we care about out of committee if they're still in committee. If bills are out of committee, great. We just need to keep them moving. We need to keep them into the second and third reading. Then we need to get them probably in front of the Ways and Means Committee if there's a monetary attachment to it. Then after it's out of those readings in the Ways and Means Committee, then it goes to the House and Senate to be voted on. Usually there's two versions of a House bill versus a Senate bill. Sometimes a Senate bill is easier to pass and a House bill won't pass. And so we need to get the House to care about it. Sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes there's a few nuances to the language. For instance, in one of our bills, we actually prefer the House version. So if both bills pass, we need to convince the compromise committee to actually go for the House version, not the Senate version. It's a little more complex than we're giving it credit for. But the big thing to keep in mind is that the action item that we're going to get to in like 10 minutes is we have until next Tuesday to make sure that the Joint Transportation Committee or whatever committee we're trying to get it out of hears from you and your local legislature to move these bills. If they don't move, we'll find other vehicles to attach them to and keep them moving like we did with the CPA bill. But ideally, what MassBike really likes to push is that second version of let's like get the bill in front of the governor as a bill because everybody loves it. And we don't need to like attach it to X, Y, and Z. Now, I will say that the things that are moving at the State House, no surprise. COVID funding. Police reform, that's moving, and that needs to. Housing, and how that's going to play out, and the general funding and the budget, and the overall transportation system, which needs a whole overhaul, and bikes, arguably, based off the question of how much of the percentage goes towards bike trails in terms of our funding. We need to care about a lot more than bikes from the State House if we're going to solve our problem of congestion and climate change. And that means electrification, that means transit, that means building out a network throughout the state. So one thing we're trying to do at MassBike is find things, bills that will be moving and making sure our concerns get attached to them, a la how the CPA language made it through. Great. My apologies for flipping that. I really didn't mean for the flow to be how a bill becomes a law and then how it actually happens. Great. So what are our current priorities? I'll go through a few and to say that this is not the be all end all. Our coalition partners have a few other priorities. You yourself, in terms of your organization's work, probably have a few other priorities. So I'm going to encourage everybody to also in the chat, throw down what you want us to pay attention to and support as well, because we're happy to write letters between now and the end of next week to make sure that your issues are elevated just the same. That said, in our mind, one of the things that we're really trying to push is traffic safety. And the omnibus bill that we are supporting, it's called An Act to Reduce Traffic Fatalities. There is a link actually, and I know Jess threw this in the chat already for our legislation, but we'll probably put that back in the chat as well. All this is detailed on our website. Feel free to check it out on your own. But this one's a big one because it's an omnibus bill that covers a lot of ground. It designates a 3-foot passing or more on the roads, which we don't have yet in Massachusetts. Right now we have, quote, safe passing distance. If you're riding a bike on the roads and a driver passes you closely, there is no real firm designation to say whether or not it was too close legally. So if the wind draft knocks you over, if you're just startled and scared, because we know that can be just as dangerous as actually being struck, or if, you know, God forbid, a rear view mirror hits your pannier or something along those lines, The driver can say, oh, I thought I was passing closely. But if there's a 3-foot designation, then you can actually have some teeth to it. This bill we call an omnibus bill because it throws a lot into it. It also designates that vehicles above a certain size, trucks essentially, need to have side guards, which is where we know that especially in urban areas, a truck driver turning right, that if, sadly enough, that's where most of our urban fatalities have come from in the past 5 years. That would require that there be a side guard on the front and rear, between the front and rear wheels on the trailers of trucks, which would prevent people from getting rolled under and crushed to death. That will directly save lives. It also designates vulnerable road users and provides special protection for vulnerable road users, not just cyclists, but also people who are on foot, people who are on micro-mobility devices, state troopers who are writing tickets on the sides of roads, construction workers, etc. So that if somebody passes closely, there is an actual designation to say, wait a minute, that was a vulnerable road user. And we can then start to assign, this bill does not assign special designation, but it defines, which can then lead to more designations around what it means to have protection as a vulnerable road user. This is an important philosophical change in how we approach traffic safety. MassBike used to run a campaign, arguably before my time, and I don't mean to begrudge prior directors, but it was called Same Roads, Same Rules. Now, practically, legally, perhaps, we have a lot of the same rules as drivers, and it's the same roads, but arguably we do not interface the same in traffic, and we need to be honest about it. And this is a way to say, okay, in statute, what does that mean? This also, lastly, standardizes data collection throughout the state, so we can actually have just one form to track the pedestrian and bicyclist crashes that are out there, where right now it's nearly impossible for an organization like MassBike to seek out just how many bike crashes took place, because some police departments say when a driver and a cyclist have a crash, it's a one vehicle crash because there's just a car. Some designate the cyclist as a pedestrian. Why? I'm not sure. Just because there's not a standardization of it. So in order to get good data, in order to follow up, to have good systems, this will help us. Now, this is an interesting one. It's filed by Rep. Strauss and Rep. Moran, Mike Moran. Rep. Strauss is the chair of the Joint Transportation Committee. Arguably, he gets to decide what bills go and don't go. Yet this bill is still in the Joint Transportation Committee, even though this is Chair Strauss's own bill. So we might need to remind the chairman that we like your bill. Your bill is good. Let's get this bill moving. This is also filed by Senator Brownsberger out in Belmont. One nuance I should mention to this is a total tangent. I didn't throw it in the slide. The Senate version requires that a cyclist must have a red rear light and a red rear reflector. The House version just keeps that language in current statute the same, a red light or a rear reflector. MassBike, our position is that to have the Senate language puts an undue burden on a cyclist, whether they can't afford a light, whether that encourages police officers to have stronger enforcement for riders, which we know is disproportionate in terms of the race of riders. Black and brown people get pulled over a lot more, statistically nationwide, on bikes than white riders. And for insurance companies, if, say, a cyclist is rear-ended, an insurance company says, oh, wait, did they have a light or did they not have a light? You know, the driver might have been drunk, or the driver might have been speeding, or the driver might have been on their phone, but because the cyclist didn't have a light and a rear reflector, we might not hold that claim. So this is kind of the trouble of the nuances. We agree at MassBike that having a rear light is a safer way to travel. However, we're concerned about how this would be enacted. So this is a total tangent, and I appreciate you all going down this road with me. One of the things we're trying to do at MassBike is our lights brigade, where we just want to give everybody lights. We don't want to mandate it and say a police officer can pull over a cyclist or an insurance company can deny a claim. What we want to say is the goal is to give lights to cyclists. Let's just flat out give lights to cyclists. And that might be a better way to approach some of the safety that we want on the roads. So I use that example to say that sometimes it really comes down to the nuance of how these bills are made and to how they're impacted and how they go into effect. And sometimes we might not need legislation in order to get at our aims. Arguably, if you're a legislator, it's your hammer and everything looks like a nail. So I don't begrudge the legislators who say, hey, I want safer roads. Let's just put it in legislation, because that's their role to play. But MassBike can be a little bit more nimble on how we view this. I should also say that some other bills have actually moved, which are part of the omnibus bill. Just because a state rep or a state senator files a bill does not preclude another state rep or a state senator from filing literally the exact same bill or a similar bill to it. So one bill that actually has moved is an act to protect vulnerable road users by requiring certain vehicles to have side underride guards and blind spot mirrors. That is like 1/5 of our omnibus bill, and that actually has moved out of the Joint Transportation Committee and is now in front of Ways and Means. So if that bill moves, we'll get part of our purpose out, which is also fine. So this comes down to just talking with the committee, talking with your state legislators to find out how things are moving, what might move, what might not move. And it might be the need that we break up the omnibus bill into a bunch of different bills in order to get each component moving. But at MassBike, we decided to throw them all under one because we think that this is not a bike-related issue. This is a vulnerable road user-related issue, and we think we can save lives beyond just cyclists. Take a quick pause there to take a drink and ask Jess or Crystal, is there anything that's popped up? Because this is a big one.
So we had a question, is if the rear light needs to be turned on to meet the law?
Good question. Not as it's written in the Senate law, actually. It just says it must need a rear light or a rear reflector. I should actually check in on that. Maybe we can follow up, and we'll throw it in the email and the blog post afterwards to answer that question. My assumption is that the law states that you must have a white light that's visible to 500 feet. My assumption is, not knowing it off the back of my hand or the top of my head, that it's probably something similar, that it must be emitting a red light, but I don't recall directly whether it needs, in the verbiage, that it always needs to be on.
Is it too late to ask reps to co-sponsor?
Great question. Co-sponsorship does not necessarily matter right now. What matters is for them to get in touch with the committees to move the bills, and to track the bills and to follow up with the bills. The shorter answer is yes. A bill does not necessarily need any more names added to it, but it does need the little bit of elbowing from your legislators' network to make sure that the bills keep in the process.
Also, is the 3-foot passing law still just for 30-mile-per-hour plus roads?
Yeah, it's a 30-mile-an-hour and for 3 feet, 40-mile-an-hour, 4 feet, 50-mile-an-hour, 5 feet, and then 1 foot. It's basically 1 foot for every 10-mile-an-hour differential. I should also say that there is, even if a bill gets reported out favorably in the current form, there's still lots of room for debate, lots of room for amendments, and lots of room for modifications. So just because the bill needs to move by next Wednesday does not necessarily mean that it's done being worked. It just means that the committee likes it enough to keep it moving.
Also, we have an ask for some clarity about what you were talking about with tracking the bills.
Excellent, good call. You can actually go to the Mass Legislature. Maybe I'll take a few minutes at the end here to do a screen share of it. You can actually follow the bills. You can track a bill, and you'll get an update when that bill starts to move, which is one of the ways that we do it here. Cool. Interest of time, I'm just going to fly through a few others. H2426, H2532, and Senate version 2273 are an act relative to automated enforcement. This bill would allow a municipality, doesn't require it, it allows a municipality to put cameras up, to do traffic infraction, and to levy relatively small fines, arguably. It's about a $20, $25 fine, depending on the bill, for specific infractions, which in our opinion is a way to get at the enforcement without requiring interactions between police officers and drivers. because we think that would, one, make it more equitable, to remove the bias inherent in how humans operate. And two, it would mean that you could have these more pervasive in a community, because you wouldn't need to waste police resources in order to put up cameras. This is in place in a lot of municipalities throughout the country. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and of course, we all know DC, arguably to a fault, is a little bit more of enforcement area. So there's cameras up all over the place. Chicago has, and a few other municipalities have it. So we have years worth of following statistics and data to see how it impacts drivers' behavior. But one of the things that we know, maybe more anecdotally than data-wise, is that when drivers think they can get away with things, they get away with them. Whether it's illegally turning right on red, and one of the big ones as part of this bill is for when drivers pass a school bus that is stopped and discharging passengers, that has the stop arms out. And when drivers pass that, that is one of the most dangerous circumstances that we know. And this would actually be able to get some automated enforcement. Right now, arguably Massachusetts has some pretty strong, thanks to the ACLU and others, of data tracking protections to a certain extent, except when you opt in, like driving on a toll road or something like that. But what this bill does is it actually captures the license plate, not the driver's image, but just the license plate, so that a fine can be levied. And if there's multiple infractions, it can go to the RMV, and there can actually be some punitive recourse for drivers who have some dangerous behavior out there. This one's a little fraught because a lot of people are like, well, what are you gonna do with the data? Or are rich municipalities going to be able to do this and poor municipalities aren't? Or are they going to put it in poor neighborhoods and leave it out of rich neighborhoods? So part of a component of this bill is to also have a report on how the impact is taking place. And we're going to follow it up with demographic data, which is important. We don't want, say, the city of Boston just to put this in poor neighborhoods, which might more detrimentally impact those residents, because we all know, unfortunately, how segregated our geographies are in Massachusetts. So that's something that we're going to be tracking with this bill as well. And again, all of this stuff is on our website, so you can follow up and check it out. Another one that we have on here, the electric bicycles bucket. We have an act relative to electric bicycles. For those of you who have been following MassBike's work for the past couple of years, this has been a simple, sensible piece of legislation which would align Massachusetts with literally 46 other states in the union, which would basically say e-bikes are not motorized bicycles. Motorized bicycles in Mass statute are considered to be mopeds. Mopeds and quote motorized bicycles in statute are prohibited from recreation off street pathways. Now we know that's not how e-bikes are. We know that the DCR is cool with at least class 1 e-bikes on their pathways, but legally they're prohibited. So unfortunately, we actually have to go into Mass statute to put into the definitions of what vehicles are, adding in electric bicycles. There's a couple ways to do this. You could just put it in saying that e-bikes are up to a certain wattage, and that's it, and they're not motorized bicycles. But what we're seeking in Massachusetts is the actual 3-class model. Class 1, up to 20 miles an hour and up to 750 watts, but you have to be pedaling. Class 2, up to 20 miles an hour, up to 750 watts, has a throttle engagement for the motor. And then class 3s that go up to 28 miles an hour, you have to be pedaling. And that would put those 3 classes in bicycle class. Doesn't necessarily mean they're allowed everywhere. It just basically says that these are the 3 classes, and then a jurisdiction or municipality or an agency can then regulate based off that. This is already in place in our federal lands. For those of you who have a national parks in your municipality, you're already allowed to use e-bikes as bikes. But if you have a DCR path, technically your e-bike is a motorized bike and prohibited. Or if you have a municipal path like the Minuteman, Arlington's okay with it, but maybe not Lexington yet, or maybe not Bedford. So this is the confusing nature. We just want to standardize. This doesn't necessarily force e-bikes on every path, but it basically allows a tool that regulations can follow sensible guidelines. This also would allow municipalities to promote, or agencies or jurisdictions to promote electric bicycles. So for instance, if you're just throw a municipality out there. Say you're Cambridge and you want to add e-bikes into your bike sharing Blue Bike network. Your lawyers might be more okay with it because nobody's going to say that you're adding in mopeds. You're adding in electric bikes, and they're considered to be bicycles, which means they're allowed on the pathways. You're allowed to ride them on sidewalks and non-business areas if you want to, as opposed to having to build into every single municipal guidelines saying, oh, wait, these aren't mopeds. Now, I don't have it on here because I didn't want to ping you too much on it, but the city of Salem actually has a home rule petition to do this, to say that e-bikes are e-bikes and not mopeds. It says, doesn't do the class model, it just says up to 750 watts, but an electric assist bicycle is to be considered a bicycle for use on the city's jurisdictions, so that the city can promote electric bicycles. Now, MassBike is a fan of this bill because it gets the issue raised, but we don't want this issue to be fought in 351 home rule petitions. So we are asking the Joint Transportation Committee to get H3457 and S2309 out by the February 2nd deadline. And this is one of our big asks. And this is an easy one. There's not a lot of opposition to it. It's just not elevated to the Transportation Committee's radar yet. Along those lines, commuter tax benefits for the commuter transit benefit would add biking, including e-bikes, into a pre-tax benefit that employers can offer. It matches it with the parking benefit and the MBTA benefits that are already out there. This is a small one, but this could have major needle moving issues for those big businesses that are out there. We all know that if Vertex wants to pick up the phone and call the mayor, something gets done. So that's kind of the angle, is to elevate the biking issue up to the HR departments of these major companies. This is a small one, but this also follows a federal one that props to Rep. Presley from the Massachusetts Fightin' Seventh down in Washington. She's trying to get this bill out through the feds as well. This was part of what used to be part of the pre-tax benefit the IRS put out there, where we would get $20 a month for tax for commuting to work by bike. Arguably, in the first year of the Trump administration, the Republicans in Congress cut out the bike portion. So this is a way to get that back in on a state level. And then the electric bicycle rebate, which is put up by Rep. Blaze out in the hill towns in Western Mass. This would provide rebates essentially through the state's electric vehicle program for people who want to purchase electric bicycles, because we know that one of the major challenges and barriers to electric bicycles is their cost. So this would essentially encourage people to buy an e-bike and get a rebate from it, basically through the Department of Energy Resources. We're currently working out what the pricing is going to be and the efficacy is going to be, but this is still stuck in committee. And this is in the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. This could be done through a voucher system or done at the point of sales at bike shops. This would help bike businesses. This would help retailers, and it would help combat our climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and reduce vehicle trips. And that's part of the goal here too. So I realize that we only have about 10 more minutes. That's a lot. Again, we're going to provide a synopsis of these bills, but the big ask is we want you, that's my next slide, we want you to pay attention to these bills. We want you to get in touch with your local legislator to help elbow the chairs of the various committees. Arguably, in our minds, the most important bills that need to move this session really should be the ones that are in the Joint Transportation Committee in terms of the traffic safety and the electric bicycles. But feel free to alert us to any other bills that we want to be aware of. I'll take a quick pause. I only have about 2 more slides left, but are there other bills? Either throw them in the chat or raise your hand and very, very briefly let us know, because there were over 5,000 bills filed this session, and this is only a small percentage of ones that we maybe should be really paying attention to. Cool. All right, I think that sounds good. Jess, Crystal, anything else popping up? All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. So this is one of our last slides, basically, is ways you can help. You've done the first step to learn about some of our priorities, but know that we work in a coalition and there are other priorities out there, depending on your angle. But also know that there's a deadline for all of this stuff. One of the best ways to get involved with this work on the state level is to get to know your state rep and state senator. They have offices that do want to hear from you. They live in your district. They might be just a couple streets down from you. They know your issues. We're running with the theme this year of all biking is local. This is where the local issues matter. If you can call up and get to know your rep and senator and say, I bike for this purpose. This is why it's important for me. This is why these bills will really help me feel safer, me bike more often, help our infrastructure come into play, whatever the angle that you care about. I don't want to dictate, and we don't want to dictate what your priorities are. But we know that, there is work that we need to do together. The main ask is between now and February 2nd to get in touch with the committee chairs. In the Joint Transportation Committee, it's Bill Strauss, who's down in the South Coast. He's the Mattapoisett, Marion, and parts of New Bedford. It's Vice Chair Senator Keenan, who's the South Shore, Quincy, coastal areas just south of Boston. And those two chairs can move these bills. I'll pull up the Transportation Committee in a second once I do a screen share, once I kill this, and we can more regularly show you how to do this step by step. It's very, very simple. Phone calls, emails to the committee chairs along with your state reps really help. And the goal is to keep up with what MassBike is going to be doing with our action alerts. Our staff is going to be pulling together, possibly as soon as tomorrow or Wednesday, a now is the time email. We'll have a couple of templates, but I will say that the most effectual way to get your issue in front of the committee chairs, who are going to be hearing from thousands upon thousands of advocates over the next week, make it personal. If you have a form letter, don't get me wrong, that's great. And if all you have time to do is just hit send on a copy paste, great, it'll get your name out there, they'll put you on a list. And you'll say, when we're tallying, X thousands of people are for this, a couple dozen people are against that. That's an important way if we actually have something contentious. But the bills that we presented today aren't actually that contentious. So what the goal is to elevate why they're important. And the best way to do that is to tell the story that you have and elevate that story to the committee chairs. We all know that biking is important for a ton of reasons. We also know that some of the biggest challenges we're facing existentially in the Commonwealth are traffic congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, and the feeling of public safety. If your comments can kind of focus on some of that, I know that will elevate the issue to the committee chairs and probably to your local state reps and senators as well. Oliver, that's an awesome, awesome question. Green card holders, not a citizen. Yes, it is certainly okay. You are represented through the decisions that your local state rep and senator make. We have bills out there as well that you might want to care about in terms of licensing for green card holders and non-citizens, and even folks who are undocumented and able to get some certain certifications, which we haven't talked about here today. But don't feel like this is you have to be 18, you have to be a white male landowner. No, we're done with that. If you live in Massachusetts, we want to hear from you. Awesome, awesome question. So the highlight items again, yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, the highlight items again.
Yeah, awesome. It's the traffic congestion. That's what the Joint Transportation Committee cares a lot about, traffic congestion. So like e-bikes will get cars off the road because I can bike my kids to school. For those of you who are involved with Safe Routes to Schools, my gosh, do a traffic audit outside of your elementary school. You will see the crisis that we are in. Greenhouse gas emissions. We know that we are basically poisoning the planet with every mile that's driven. So what bicycles can do is help alleviate that. It was not the answer, but it's part of the answers, which helps with the electric bicycle rebates as well. because electric vehicle rebates should also include e-bikes, in our opinion. And the third one, so again, it's traffic congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change. And then the public safety aspect. How safe are you on the roads? Do you feel safe with a police officer interaction? Do you feel safe on the roads with drivers who are not paying attention to you or who might not respect your rights to be out there? Do you feel safe? And that's very, very important to bring out, that we need to provide a safe environment for all citizens to be welcome and encouraged to be riding our bikes.